Picture this. A man stands in front of the mirror, shoulders tense, jaw tight. He's 35, successful, at least by the world's definition, but there's a heaviness in his eyes, a quiet, invisible fatigue that no achievement can wash away. He doesn't know why he feels small in moments that demand confidence, why he hesitates to speak his truth, why anger feels like danger and love feels like a transaction. He just knows something inside him was shaped wrong. Long before he could control it, what if that something was your father? Most men never realize this, that their emotional blueprint was carved by the man who raised them or by the silence of the man who didn't. We grow up imitating what we see, not what we're told. A father who never says, "I'm proud of you," teaches his son that love must be earned. A father who shouts teaches that power equals fear. And a father who vanishes leaves a question that echoes for decades. Am I enough to stay for you? See? Weakness doesn't always mean cowardice. Sometimes it means obedience. Sometimes it means you were trained to suppress, to endure, to submit, because that's how survival looked when you were small. You learned to silence your anger, to avoid his temper. You learned to overplease, to earn his approval. And now, as a man, you still performing those same emotional gymnastics, trying to win battles that began in your childhood. Psychology calls this intergenerational conditioning. I call it the inherited wound. The father's unhealed pain becomes the son's internal law. He doesn't pass down his wisdom, he passes down his fears. His silence becomes your uncertainty. His dominance becomes your stout doubt, and you wear it like skin, thinking it's who you are. But here's the paradox. Even if your father was good, you still might be carrying his shadow. Maybe he worked endlessly, providing, but never present. Maybe he loved, but couldn't express it. Maybe he believed strength meant never crying, and now you believe vulnerability is weakness. That S, the quiet poison of masculine inheritance, the lessons we didn't know, we learned. So when I say you are weak because of your father, I'm not insulting you. I'm describing a truth that most men are too afraid to face, because facing it means confronting the man you once idolized, the one you swore you'd never become, only to realize you already have. This isn't about blame, it's about awakening. Understanding the origins of your weakness is the first step toward reclaiming your power, the power to redefine what strength means on your own terms. And that S, what we do in this video, strip the myth of the perfect father, dissect the psychological inheritance every man carries, and expose the hidden mechanism that shapes male identity before a man even knows who he is. Let's start with a truth most men never want to admit. Your father was your first mirror. Before you knew what strength meant, you saw it in him. Before you understood love, you received all word denied it from him. And whether he was a hero, a ghost, or a tyrant, he wrote the first draft of your identity. 1. The mirror of masculinity as children. We don't analyze, we absorb. When your father walked into the room, his silence or his presence filled the space. If he was calm, you felt safe. If he was explosive, you learned to read the air, to shrink before the storm. Every sigh, every word, every look became data for your young mind. You weren't forming opinions, you were forming survival patterns. A boy studies his father not just to understand him, but to become him. He watches how the man handles failure, how he treats his mother, how he carries anger, how he holds pain. If that model was broken, you inherited the fracture. Psychologists call this modeling behavior. It's how we learn unconsciously through imitation. If your father suppressed emotion, you learned suppression equals control. If your father yelled to assert power, you learned that volume equals dominance. If your father disappeared, you learned that absence equals normal. So when you find yourself today unable to express love, unable to cry, or unable to stay, that isn't random, that's programming. You're reenacting your father's unfinished lessons. 2. The emotional scar he left. Fathers leave two kinds of marks, visible guidance or invisible wounds, and most men inherit the second. Maybe your father told you to man up every time you cried. Maybe he called you weak for needing comfort. Maybe he made you feel like your emotions were burdens instead of signals. What he didn't realize is that each of those moments carved neural patterns in your brain, pathways of shame and restraint that still govern your adult reactions. You flinch at confrontation because his anger used to mean danger. You overachieve because his approval felt like oxygen. You fear intimacy because the one man who should have stayed didn't. Even if you love him now, even if you've forgiven him, the blueprint remains, because the human mind doesn't forget what it learned under threat. 3. The generational curse. Weak men don't create themselves. They are manufactured by stronger men who confuse fear with discipline, or by absent men who call neglect freedom. Your father was also someone's son, and maybe his father told him the same thing. Don't cry, don't feel, don't talk. He passed that manual down to you, not out of malice, but out of ignorance. He was teaching survival in a world that punished emotion. The tragedy is that survival became your identity. You don't know who you are without the armor. That's the generational curse. Men handing down unhealed pain disguised as wisdom. It's why sons grow up believing love must be earned. Why they chase women not for connection, but for validation. Why they compete with other men for status, even when no one's watching. You are living inside the emotional architecture your father built. A fortress of silence and pride that keeps danger out, but also keeps peace away. For the father wound, there's a term in depth psychology, the father wound. It describes the deep emotional void created when a boy's relationship with his father is broken, distant, or conditional. It's not always abuse. Sometimes it's just absence, the quiet kind that hides behind a paycheck or a busy schedule. That wound manifests differently for every man. Some become pleasers, desperate to make everyone happy because, as kids, they couldn't make their father proud. Some become fighters, constantly aggressive, because the only time their father noticed them was during conflict. Some become ghosts, emotionally detached, incapable of commitment, because love feels like a trap. The father wound doesn't heal with time, it heals with awareness. But most men never look that deep, because looking there means confronting a painful truth that the man you needed most may have failed you. And now you, refailing yourself in the same ways. 5. The illusion of strength. Society tells you strength is about control. Keep your emotions locked down. Don't show weakness, don't complain, work harder, provide more. And you do. You overwork, overthink, overcompensate. You build the body, the career, the reputation, but late at night, when no one's watching, you still feel small. That's because true strength doesn't come from control. It comes from integration. You are not strong because you suppress pain. You are strong when you can face it without letting it destroy you. The weakness your father passed down wasn't physical. It was emotional illiteracy, the inability to feel without collapsing, to express without fear, to love without bargaining. He wasn't evil. He was uneducated in the language of emotion, a language men were never taught to speak. 6. The unspoken competition. Many men live their lives in silent rivalry with their fathers. Even when he's gone, you're still trying to prove something, that you're better, smarter, stronger. You make every achievement an act of rebellion, every failure a secret shame. You measure your worth against a ghost. But what you're really trying to prove is that you're enough to be seen. The irony, your father probably felt the same way about his own. Two men, generations apart, running the same emotional race, and neither crossing the finish line. Breaking that loop means recognizing that the competition is imaginary. You don't have to outperform your father. You just have to outgrow him. 7. The absent father and the emotional vacuum. For men raised without a father, the story is different, but the result is the same: a hunger for validation. When there's no male figure to mirror your emotions, you spend adulthood searching for replacement mirrors, mentors, lovers, friends, even enemies. Anyone who can give you that feeling of being seen. But here's the dark side. When you don't know what healthy love looks like, you accept any love that shows up. You mistake chaos for passion. You chase rejection because it feels familiar. That's how fatherlessness breeds addiction, not just to substances, but to patterns, to pain, to proving yourself. You're not addicted to people. You're addicted to the feeling of trying to be enough. 8. The myth of the perfect father. No father is perfect. But some men let their father's failures become their identities. You say, "I'll never be like him." Then years later, you catch yourself raising your voice the same way he did, walking away the same way he walked away, shutting down like he did when things got hard. That's when you realize the cycle isn't broken just because you disagreed with it. It's broken only when you unlearn it. Forgiveness doesn't mean letting him off the hook. It means freeing yourself from his control. because as long as your choices are reactions to him, you're still his creation. The real rebellion is peace, living without the emotional weight he gave you. 9. The rebuilding of the inner father. There comes a moment in every man's life when he must become his own father, to give himself what he was denied: approval, protection, discipline, compassion. It's not about rejecting your biological father. It's about replacing the blueprint he left with, one you consciously build. When you start doing that, you stop seeking external validation. You stop chasing impossible approval. You start standing for yourself, not against him. You begin to say, "He taught me what not to do." And that is still a lesson in Jungian psychology. This is called the individuation process, becoming a whole autonomous self. It's when you integrate both your father's shadow and your own. No longer blaming, no longer excusing, simply understanding. 10. The quiet revolution healing the father wound is not loud. It's not a speech or a confrontation. It's subtle. It's when you stop apologizing for your emotions. When you speak, even when your voice shakes. When you stop seeking approval before making decisions. When you look in the mirror and say, "I am the man I needed when I was a boy." That is the moment your father's legacy ends and your own begins. Because true masculinity isn't inherited, it's built. Not from dominance, but from awareness. Not from control, but from emotional courage. Not from fear, but from the choice to evolve. Let's strip this down to its essence. Every man is born innocent, but raised inside someone else's story. And the first story he absorbs isn't from books or teachers. It's from his father's behavior. When you look closely, most men today aren't truly free. They're extensions of unfinished generations. The suit they wear, the way they love, the tone they use when they argue, all of it is an echo of someone before them. That's why you can change cities, jobs, and relationships, but still repeat the same emotional patterns. 1. The silent programming. Your father didn't have to say anything to shape you. Children read tone more than words. When he clenched his jaw after failure, you learned shame. When he ignored your tears, you learned invisibility. When he looked disappointed, you learned that love is conditional. Those aren't lessons, they're blueprints, and your nervous system built its foundations around them. As an adult, you call it personality, but deep down, it's survival. You people please because your father's anger trained your body to equate harmony with safety. You shut down because his silence taught you that expression equals rejection. You chase impossible goals because, once upon a time, achievement was the only language he understood. The irony, he didn't design it consciously. He was operating under his own programming, passed down from his father. That's how emotional inheritance works. Not through genetics, but through repetition. 2. The masculine paradox. Men are told to be strong, but never taught what strength actually is. So they imitate what they've seen: toughness, stoicism, control. But control without connection breeds numbness. And numbness, masquerading as strength, becomes weakness, the kind that destroys relationships quietly. This is the masculine paradox. You were told emotions make you weak, so you buried them. Now, your inability to feel has made you fragile. Because true resilience doesn't come from denial, it comes from understanding. A man who can face his pain without collapsing is stronger than a man who hides behind performance. Your father may have mistaken stoicism for stability, but stoicism without self-awareness is repression. It doesn't build you, it isolates you. 3. The legacy of emotional illiteracy. Here's a hard truth. Most fathers were emotionally illiterate. Not stupid, not heartless, just unequipped. They could fix cars, build houses, survive wars, but they couldn't articulate what they felt. They were taught to endure, not to understand. So they raised sons who could endure pain, but not process it. Sons who can work 12 hours a day, but can sit in silence with their thoughts for 5 minutes. Sons who can protect others, but can't protect themselves from their own inner voice. The legacy of emotional illiteracy, strengthen every area except the one that matters most, the modern. For the modern consequence, look around. We live in a generation of lost men. Men addicted to distraction because stillness feels dangerous. Men terrified of vulnerability because their fathers never modeled it. Men craving validation from women because they never received it from the first woman they loved, their mother, or the first man they feared, their father. Modern masculinity has become performance art. Every post, every flex, every quote, about grind and discipline is a cry for acknowledgement. It's not power, it's pain disguised as ambition. The modern man isn't weak because he lacks physical strength. He's weak because he lacks emotional sovereignty. He reacts instead of chooses. He repeats instead of reflects. He tries to prove instead of understand. And the origin of that pattern, almost always, is the father wound. 5. The myth of rebellion. You think you rebelled against your father. Look again. You might just be repeating him in reverse. If he was controlling, maybe you became passive. If he was distant, maybe you became clingy. If he was cold, maybe you became overly emotional. Opposition is still reaction, and reaction is still control. Freedom begins only when you stop defining yourself in contrast to him. When you stop saying, "I'll never be like him," and start saying, "I choose what I become." That shift from reaction to creation is what separates a man bound by his past from a man rewriting it. 6. The emotional economy of fathers and sons. Every father trades in emotional currency. Some give affection, others give expectation. The richest childhood isn't T1 filled with luxury, it's S1 filled with emotional clarity. But most fathers pay their sons in confusion. Be strong but kind, be tough but gentle. Win but don't boast. So the boy grows up in contradiction. He learns to overcompensate, swinging between extremes. Hyperindependence or emotional neediness. That's why so many men either chase love desperately or avoid it entirely. They were never shown balance. They were only shown polarity. Understanding that pattern doesn't make you weak. It makes you free, because awareness breaks repetition. 7. The psychology of forgiveness. Forgiveness is not letting your father off the hook. It's breaking the chain that binds you to him. The moment you understand that he was also a product of pain, not its origin, something shifts. You stop seeing him as the villain and start seeing him as the messenger. A flawed man, carrying flawed lessons, doing the best he could with what he had. Forgiveness is intellectual maturity. It's saying, I can't change the past, but I can end the pattern. Because holding on to resentment is another form of loyalty to the pain, and that loyalty keeps you small. 8. The archetype of the inner father. Jung believed every man contains within him an archetypal father figure, a guiding voice that replaces the biological father once the psyche matures. But most men never activate that inner archetype because they re-emotionally frozen at the age their father first disappointed them. If your father left at 7, part of you is still 7. If he humiliated you at 15, part of you is still 15. Healing means reparenting yourself, not waiting for an apology that may never come. It's when you start giving yourself the validation, structure, and love that you once begged for. That's how boys become men, not by repeating their fathers, but by outgrowing them internally. 9. The philosophical truth of inheritance. Philosophically, your father represents fate. You didn't choose him, and yet his choices define you. That's the tragedy and the challenge of human existence, to transform what you inherited into something conscious. Nietzsche called this amor fati, the love of one's fate. It means accepting the pain you were given, not as punishment, but as raw material. You don't heal by erasing the past. You heal by integrating it, by saying, yes, this shaped me, but it doesn't define me anymore. That's the highest act of masculine creation, turning inherited pain into wisdom. 10. The reflection you must face now. Ask yourself quietly, what part of your father still lives inside you? The silence, the rage, the absence, and what will your children inherit if you never confront it? Every man who refuses to heal his father wound becomes the father his son must recover from. That's the cycle. That's why awareness isn't optional, it's duty, because one day someone will call you father, and he will learn not from what you say, but from who you are when you think no one's watching. 11. The emotional evolution of man. The old definition of masculinity served a purpose: survival. Men had to suppress emotion to hunt, fight, build. But now, the battlefield is internal. The weapon is awareness. If you fight the world but lose your peace, you haven't won. You've just inherited your father's war. Evolution demands emotional literacy. A man who can master his emotions doesn't need to dominate others. A man who can speak his truth doesn't need validation. A man who can forgive his father doesn't need to prove he's different. That is the next generation of masculine strength. Integration over imitation. 12. Reflection. The final mirror look in the mirror again. You're not just seeing yourself, you're seeing centuries of fathers who never learned to feel. You're seeing survival patterns wearing suits, traumas with titles, pain with promotions. But now, for the first time, you know. And awareness changes everything. You can end the cycle. You can become the father figure you never had, not to a child, but to your own soul. That's where healing begins. In the quiet moment, you stop asking, "Why did he do this to me?" and start asking, "What will I do differently?" There's a moment in every man's life when he finally stops waiting for the apology that will never come, waiting for the approval that was never given, waiting for the father who never learned how to love. And in that silence, something profound happens. He realizes that the pain he inherited was never personal. It was ancestral. Your father wasn't your enemy. He was the messenger carrying the wounds of men who came before him. He passed them to you, not out of cruelty, but out of blindness. And now, it's your turn to decide what to pass on. You can continue the cycle, live numb, angry, disconnected, or you can end it right here with awareness. Because healing doesn't start with forgiveness. It starts with responsibility. Not for what was done to you, but for what you do with it now. When you choose to face your pain instead of projecting it, you become the father you needed. You give yourself what he couldn't: stability, compassion, validation. That's when weakness transforms into wisdom. That's when you stop being a reflection of your father and start becoming the reflection of your own evolution. You see, real strength isn't about how much you can suppress. It's about how deeply you can understand without breaking. It's not about control. It's about integration. The strongest man is not the one who never cries. It's the one who can hold his tears, understand their origin, and still stand tall with an open heart. That is the masculinity the world needs now. Not louder men, but deeper men. Not colder men, but conscious ones. Men who know that power without awareness is just another form of weakness. So tonight, when you look in the mirror, don't just see the man you are. See the line of men behind you. Your father, his father. All the unhealed stories that led here. And then whisper to them, softly but firmly, "It ends with me." You can't rewrite the past, but you can rewrite its influence. You can become the proof that evolution isn't just biological, it's emotional. Because in the end, the greatest rebellion is not anger, not avoidance, not revenge. It's peace. The kind of peace that says, "I understand where it came from. I know what it did to me, and I choose differently." That's when you stop being your father's son and finally become your own man.